Welcome to the Recover You podcast. I'm Kylene.
And I'm Patrick.
We are a couple in recovery
from sex addiction
and betrayal trauma. Together, we share our story to encourage you on your journey. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Recover You. This is a solo episode with Kylene, and I'm so happy to be with you today. Today, we're going to talk about making decisions. This is one of the things that all of us through life struggle with, right? Like we all hit a point in life where maybe it's in college and we're trying to decide, what's the next step? Or maybe it's when we get into college and we think, well, what do I actually want to do? What do I want to major in? And we all come to this place, I think, if we haven't earlier, when we are working through recovery, because there are just so many decisions to be made and they are so hard. But the primary decision that we come to face is, do I think that I can reconcile my relationship? And how do I know that? How do I make a decision? We've talked about a lot of the things that go into this in previous episodes, right? Religious background, the basis of your relationship, the depth of your relationship, the depth of the pain of the betrayal, the type of betrayal, all of these things play into, having a family, if you have kids together, all of these things play into the decision-making process. But the thing I think I want to start out by saying in this episode is if you are the betrayed partner, which is who this episode is primarily for, if you are the betrayed partner, I want to just take the idea of making a decision off the table, especially if you're within the first year of discovery, because it's just so much pressure and you really don't need that. There's so many other things that you need to focus on. We've also talked about this concept that a lot of people recommend that you sort of take the first year to gather information to make any sort of decision. And I definitely agree with that, with a few caveats. If you like your partner and you thought you had a good relationship and then this absolutely shocked and devastated you, then giving yourself a year to process the information and to see what your partner is going to do can be really, really helpful as you navigate this. But if there's any sort of abuse, lack of taking responsibility, gaslighting, anything like that, just do not take that recommendation as any sort of pressure to stay in a relationship that you know is not healthy. Okay, so I just want to kind of set that out there right away. But what we're going to do today is I'm just going to talk through just some ways to think through making life decisions, particularly about your relationship. Specifically, if you're listening to this, probably after betrayal. But really, this can be applied to so many other times in your life when we just feel stuck, when we just feel frustrated, when we feel depressed or anxious. And I'm just going to give you some tools, some questions to ask, some ways to think about your relationship that hopefully will help you sort of personally navigate this type of thinking and this decision-making process. And, this is something that I work a lot with my clients on because every relationship is so unique. So while a lot of the questions that women have and betrayed partners have are similar, and you're not alone, and we do very much experience the same struggles as each other when we go through betrayal, there are specific instances that are unique, right? Like I said, everybody's betrayal is a little bit different. Everybody's family situation is a little bit different. And so just kind of understanding that, we're going to take sort of this high perspective when we are having this conversation today. And I'm just going to give you some ways, some tools, some resources, some questions to sort of think through this and maybe just apply it to your own situation. And if you need any support one-on-one individually, click the link in the show notes. I do work with women one-on-one, and I'm happy to help you personalize this process. So let's start by, just the general question. Like, I feel stuck. How can I make a decision about our relationship? So let's just kind of make the assumption that you guys are beyond the first year. Okay, so we've taken that off the table. And if you're within the first year, a lot of our other episodes are going to be helpful in terms of, creating the safety, creating the stability, getting the right support tools, getting your partner into sobriety, those sorts of things. That's what a lot of the first year encompasses, is sort of seeing if that is possible, if that's doable, like what's going to happen, right? So let's assume that you are two people who like each other and you are past the first year, but as the betrayed partner, the reality is it's hard. It is just so hard. Your husband, the person who has done the betraying, your partner could check off every single box. And I mean, go above and beyond. And you could still feel anxious. You could still feel depressed. You could still feel frustrated. And you could still regularly ask yourself this question like, I don't know if I can do this. Can I do this? Can I stay in this relationship? And so I first of all just want to validate that if that's you and you're feeling frustrated and maybe you listen to this podcast and you're like, well, Patrick and Kylene have stayed together and like that's what I want for myself and they're providing hope and they're providing inspiration, and I am so glad if you see that in us, and that's our hope and that is what we are here for, and that is true, and we love each other and we are pushing forward, and I want that for you if it's healthy, if it's possible for you guys. I absolutely want that for you, and that's we want to share like how to do that in a healthy way so that you both live individually satisfying healthy lives together. But I also never want to sugarcoat the reality that as a betrayed partner, this process has been horrible. It has been incredibly painful. And so, and it continues to I continue to have difficult moments, and we continue to have difficult conversations sometimes. And, we've talked about this, like triggers become less and less frequent. They become less and less intense, but every once in a while, something will happen where I will it's like the trauma hits, right? And that is the reality of trauma. And so if that is you and you're 2 years in, 3 years in, 5 years in, and you've been listening to this podcast and you've gotten hope and you think your relationship is going well, and then you hit a wall and you're like, I just don't know if I can do this anymore. I just want to validate that that's normal. There are so many reasons that can happen. Maybe you're coming up to an anniversary and your body is remembering that and you're not. And that could be an anniversary of trauma. That could be a wedding anniversary. It could be a specific date. Your body remembers time in a different way than your brain does. And so there's a lot of different reasons. As women, we can go through hormonal cycles where we become a little more reactive, a little more sensitive to trauma, a little more sensitive to emotions closer to our bleeding time. And so that's just a reality. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just part of the way God created our bodies. And as we get closer to bleeding, our serotonin drops. And so I know for me, I can be particularly sensitive to that. So I actually have serotonin support that I bring in through my supplementation. And I work with, that's something else I can do with my clients as well, if they're open to it, is kind of help with supplements and things like that. But for me, I can be very sensitive to that. So the way I've described it, and I think I've mentioned this before here, is sometimes there's a veil that is put up. So for me, as I go through healing, the veil is up and I can think about betrayal. I can work with my clients. I can talk about sex addiction. I can do this podcast. I can do all these things. And it really no longer bothers me because I'm pretty happy with my life. There are some days, however, that the veil comes down. So for whatever reason, maybe it's a cellular memory thing. Maybe it's where I am in my cycle. Maybe it's that I've been under more stress. And so some of my nutrients are depleted. Like there's so many reasons that this can happen. But there are days where the veil comes down and then it really hurts again. And it feels like the trauma. And that's the thing about trauma is trauma doesn't really have, it doesn't view time the same way. So like where I just said, your body holds on to time and things, cellular memory, right? What makes that so interesting and unique about trauma is it kind of messes with your personal timeline because we think, well, that was 5 years ago. It shouldn't feel present to me today, but sometimes it does. And that's why trauma can be so difficult, is because when you're triggered, when the veil is down, as I call it sometimes, when things feel a little more sensitive, a little more real, it brings that experience into the present moment, even if it was 5 years ago. Okay. So I just want to validate that is normal. It doesn't mean that we can't support the brain. It doesn't mean that we can't support the body. And again, this is assuming that you and your partner have already created safety and stability. So I just want to sort of like start with that concept that these ups and downs are normal. Okay. But when you are really hitting this wall over and over and over again, maybe you're feeling really depressed. Maybe you're feeling really anxious. Maybe you're just feeling frustrated and you're just like, I don't know what to do and I'm feeling stuck. I'm not feeling happy with my life where it is right now. This is just really, 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 really hard. And it is. It's so hard. Even if staying is like a good decision for you, it's still hard, right? So I just want to help you think through a couple things. So here are, it might sound new to you, or it might sound like, oh yeah, of course, this is how you do it. But this is something that I talk to my clients about. And it's this idea of we need to make decisions based on the reality of what is, not this idea of what if in the future. Now, let me clarify what I mean there, because so much about what we talk about in reconciliating recovery is planning for the future and creating a vision. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit when I walk you through some questions that are going to help you sort of make these decisions about your life. We have to hold a vision for the future, but we have to make decisions today based on the reality of what is, not what we hope might be that's not based in reality. So let me kind of talk about what I mean here. When we're thinking about something that is going to impact our life, like getting married or staying married or getting a divorce or separating or deciding if we want to try reconciliation or any of these really big life-changing things, right? And in this context, talking about making decisions in our life that involve another person. Okay, that's really important. When we're talking about things that involve another person, we do want to think about the past. And what I mean by thinking about the past, because so many times, sometimes I'll hear people be like, well, I know, like, I just need to let the past go. I just need to let it go. I just need to be in the present. And yes, to an extent, we want to heal enough that we can live in the present and make decisions from the present. But that doesn't mean we forget the past. It doesn't mean we deny the past. In fact, we take information from the past to help us be in the present and to help us make decisions based on reality. So one of the things I do with a lot of my clients, when it's applicable to their life situation, is educate them on the abuse cycle and the manipulation cycle. And so basically what that looks like is your partner does something that crosses a boundary or hurts you in some way. You react, of course, to that. You let them know that that's not okay, or you get angry, or you get sad, or you're hurt by that, and whatever response you have to that, which is normal, right? If somebody crosses your boundary, your natural reaction is going to be to respond to that. Then the abuse manipulation cycle is when instead of taking responsibility for that, they blame you, or they gaslight you, or they love bomb you, whatever it is that they know how to calm you down in a way that usually they don't really receive any sort of long-term consequence. Basically, how can they navigate this situation in a way that calms you down and they get to stay in the relationship and nothing bad really happens? And then everything sort of goes back to normal. And the way that you know that it is a manipulation abuse cycle is that you end up back at the first step where they do the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. Okay. And so we really learn how to fall into patterns with our partners, right? It's fairly easy when one person triggers us and then we respond to it. If that's our natural tendency, we respond in a certain way. And then when we sort of learn that pattern, we can just fall into it over and over. And so there's two ways to get off of this cycle, right? Is that they change their behavior permanently so we don't end up back at the crossing of the boundary over and over. Or we choose to change our behavior, which is what a boundary is. We say, regardless of what they do, like what they choose, if this happens again, I'm going to respond differently. Okay. So this is what I mean about taking the past into consideration. You have to look at their behavior in the past to know what your possibility for the future is. So when we're thinking about making plans for the future, if we have this idealized Prince Charming sort of in the future idealization of like, well, if he could heal, if he would do the work, if this, if that, if this, if that, we could have a good relationship. I want you to look at that in light of the past. Has he exhibited any of those characteristics in the past? Has he done any of those things in the past? Has he demonstrated that he's capable of any of those patterns in the past, right? So that's very, very important. So for example, I've mentioned this several times on the podcast where I was absolutely shocked that Patrick was doing this behavior. And I never wanted to overlook that or excuse it. What I was able to take into account, however, was that every other area of his life that I had observed over a little less than a decade of being together at that time was that when he put his mind to something, he could accomplish it, and that he would see it through, and that he would show up, and that he would do it. And so I had a pattern of behavior from the past that I was able to say, okay, if he was able to do that with this thing, then maybe it would be okay, right? I did not have a pattern of him dropping the ball all the time, not showing up, verbally abusing me, putting me down physically, none of this, because when I had discovered what happened, that's part of why it was such a shock. And so that would have maybe been a completely different story for me. For example, like in my first relationship, it was a very, very, very different scenario. And so taking the past patterns and behaviors of your relationship, of your partner, and their character, what they're capable of, what they have proven to you time and time and time again, do they fall into negative patterns, or do they have a history of positive patterns? Do they have a history of blaming you for a lot of things, or do they have a history of taking responsibility? Do they have a history of not showing up, or do they have a history of showing up? Do they have a history of not completing things, or do they have a history of following things through? Okay, so the past is actually very important to think about when you're making these big lifetime decisions. The second thing is to think about the present, because the reality is transformation is real. Okay. Redemption is something I deeply believe in. I absolutely believe that God can transform hearts and minds. And I do think that he can do it overnight. Now, we've also talked about spiritual bypassing and the reality that most of the time, God also includes a lot of work on our part and community and support from other humans in order for this to happen. But I still believe that there is transformation of the heart and mind. And that's what can ultimately lead to dramatically changing our lives, from making poor decisions in the past and having poor habits and making, thinking certain ways, to completely changing our behaviors and living a healthy life and choosing good things and thinking really healthy ways. Okay. So when I say think about the present, I want you to observe, and this is what I talk about a lot with the first year, the sit back and observe for the betrayed partner, is like, what are they demonstrating they are capable of now? What are they demonstrating they are capable of now? Because yes, even if they didn't finish things in the past, if they're demonstrating consistently, and that's the key word here, if they are demonstrating consistently that they can complete things, they can be proactive, they can finish things, they can do it intentionally, it is important to them, then that's okay to believe that. Now, if you have a history of the abuse pattern, the manipulation pattern, where they say they are going to do something, and then that calms everything down, and then they don't follow through, and that's been a consistent pattern, then thinking about the present is going to be even more important, and giving that a significant period of time to observe and make sure that the pattern is different is going to be very important. So when I say think about the past and think about the present, it's take into account what you have seen about their character, what has been proven to be true consistently over time, and then also take into consideration what is currently happening in your relationship and in their life right now. Are you seeing heart change? There's something I hear a lot from betrayed partners, like they can really, and I encourage you to trust your intuition here, they can really tell when it is sincere, because we can all do things without it being like a deep heart motivation behind it, right? We can all check a box, right? We can all, and engage in behaviors without it actually meaning anything to us. And then we can have transformational life experiences where it's deeply meaningful. We truly care. It's not just about making somebody else happy, right? And so partners can very often see when the person who has done the betraying is just checking off the box to save the marriage or to stay in the relationship or to avoid the consequences, versus when they are deeply ashamed of their behavior, they take responsibility, they want to heal regardless of whether you stay together or not, and they are doing this for them because they care. Okay, so take that into consideration and follow your intuition. You know this person better than anybody else. You know your relationship better than anyone else. So it is okay when you're a little bit confused, I want you to trust that intuition to really know, like, is this a heart thing for them? So thinking about the past, what has been proven to be true historically in your relationship, in their life, what you know to be true and capable, and the reality of the situation, and then what is currently happening. Are they demonstrating change? Are they demonstrating real change? And are they demonstrating it consistently? Okay. And then I want you to think about the future based on the reality of those two things. Okay, so that is where we can make these decisions from a healthier place, from a place of reality, versus sometimes what I see us struggle with in the betrayal community is we really do believe in redemption. We do believe in forgiveness. We do believe in empathy, right? And so sometimes it can be easy to get caught up in this painting a picture of the future that is just not based on reality, and holding on to this hope of change and transformation that they are not currently demonstrating is an actual possibility. So we don't want to make decisions based on that, based on a dream. We want to make decisions based on what has been proven to be true in the past and currently being proven true in the present. And again, if they are beginning to demonstrate some change in the present, we do want to give that some time, right? Because we want to make sure that it's true, that it's sincere, that it's consistent, that it will last the test of time. And that's where you're really going to start to notice your nervous system feeling safe. Because here's the thing about your nervous system, it is so incredibly, and I mean incredibly intelligent. And what I think happens a lot of times is we try to logic our way out of listening to our nervous system. It's like, well, I think this, I logic this, I process this, I ruminate about this. If we can learn how to be still and communicate to our nervous system and drop into our bodies more and listen to that intuition, your nervous system and your brain will not relax until they feel safe. And safety is priority number one for actually being able to heal. And if we want any hope of reconciliation, it's got to be built on safety. And so yes, absolutely. There are ways that, again, we can bring in resources. We can bring in supplementation. We can bring in sleep tips. We can bring in nervous system support. But the actual safety of our environment and our relationship has to be there. We can't out supplement not being safe, because your brain will not believe it. It's too smart. Your nervous system will not believe it. It's too smart. So we need to kind of connect all of these things. And that's where we can get a little stuck if we're trying to override our nervous system and we're really, really, really holding on to a picture that is not based in reality. So my encouragement is to think about the past, really kind of think through that, maybe journal about it, maybe document what are some experiences you've had where you've seen certain behaviors, and have they been consistent in the past or not? And then thinking about the present, what is currently being demonstrated? Are they being proactive? Are they going to therapy? Are they being vulnerable? Or if they're really early on, are they trying to do these things and learning how to do these things? And you're on a trajectory of progress that's consistent. Okay. And then thinking about the future based on what does the past and present look like? Okay, is this hope that I have a reality based on what currently is? Okay, so that's the first part of what I wanted to talk to you today, is just thinking through a little bit of that. So For the rest of the episode today, I'm just going to give some questions to support you and guide you as you continue to think through these situations. So the first question to ask yourself in the present moment is, if nothing changes in our relationship or our lives, or another way to word this is like, maybe you've seen some changes and we're kind of in that phase where you're observing his behavior, right? So you've seen a little bit of change, but you're sort of waiting to see if it's long-term. Another way to ask this question, if that's the case, would be if we stay on the same trajectory as we are right now. Okay, so if nothing changes right now, because maybe there hasn't been any change, or if there's been a little bit of change and we stay on the same trajectory, will I be okay with this pattern, this behavior, this level of improvement, this trajectory? Will I be okay with this in 5 years? Okay, so if the answer is yes, then that's a good sign that you're headed in the right direction. If the answer is no, that's an opportunity to set some really clear boundaries, to create the vision, to really get a clear understanding between the two of you of where you're going and what it is that you want and what needs to change. So the second thing to think about, and again, that's you again, take into consideration any previous patterns of behavior that have been shown to come up regularly, and think about that with that question. Like, what am I going to be okay with in 5 years? Like, if this pattern continues, am I going to be okay with dealing with this for another 5 years? If this positive change continues, but maybe it's not perfect right now, but I'm seeing a trajectory of progress, if that trajectory stays on the same line, am I going to be okay with that in 5 years? And maybe the answer is yes, because it's going well and it's only going to get better if that's the case. The second question is, what do I actually believe is healthy? Now, when you do this, and I want you to journal about this, I want you to think for a minute, I want you to take your relationship out of the equation. So take all of the pain, all of the trauma, all of the personal experiences, just take that out of the equation when you're doing this journal exercise. And I just want you to like dream a little bit, maybe go back to like your 18-year-old self or your 15-year-old self when you were dreaming about marriage, or maybe current self, like maybe you have a little bit of a different perspective than you did when you were 15. But what I want you to do is I just want you to think about, like, what do you deeply believe is healthy? Like, if you were to observe someone else's relationship and want to imitate that couple and imitate their level of health and love in a relationship, what does a healthy relationship look like to you? And I want you to get so specific in this exercise. So I'm going to give you some prompts to journal about, and I want you to get kind of detailed. Like, what does the sexual relationship look like in a healthy relationship? What does communication look like in a healthy relationship? What are the do's and the don'ts? What does happen and what doesn't happen? What does a couple who trusts each other look like? How do they interact together? How do they talk together? You know, what does trusting each other in a relationship look like? What does, like, if someone has a healthy relationship, what kind of goals do they have? And maybe you can make this a little more specific to you. What kind of goals do you have? And does that couple, are they supporting each other in their goals? Do they have individual goals? Do they create goals for their relationship together? Like, again, going back to the communication part, what kind of communication does the couple that has a really healthy relationship that you want to emulate and you want to like work towards that? What kind of conversations do they have? Are they talking about these things? Do they dream together? What kind of hobbies do they have? What activities are they engaged in? What do their friends look like? If you're looking at a healthy couple, what's their friend group look like? Does the wife go off and have some really strong, healthy friendships with some girlfriends? Do they have couples friends? Do they host dinners at their house on Friday night and invite people over? What does that look like? And again, this is specific to your perfect couple, but do infuse some of your things in here, because obviously this is kind of like your perspective and what you want in life here. What's free time look like? Do they spend it together? Do they enjoy each other's company? Do they like sitting on the couch next to each other and watching certain movies? Do they like playing games? Do they like taking walks outside? Do they prefer to go check out the newest restaurant down the street? How do they spend their free time? And again, this is one where you definitely would personalize it, right? Family, do they have a bunch of kids? Do they not have kids? Like, again, this is going to be personalized for you. So there's no right or wrong here, but what does this look like? What's their partnership together look like? What kind of goals do they have together? How do they support each other in their lives? Again, what is healthy to you? What is this thing that you want to work towards? What does this look like? How do they respect each other? Like, how do they talk about each other in front of each other? Like, what kind of things does your partner say about you? What kind of things do you say about your partner? And then how do they talk about each other to their friends? Is it the same? Do they show up differently? Do they show, So thinking about, this is the second question here is, what do I believe is healthy? What does a healthy relationship look like? And I really want you to take some time to think through that. Go through those journal prompts. Think through, what does that look like? Because what you've just done there is essentially create the vision of what you want to work towards with your spouse. And that gives you a roadmap. And when I feel lost, and when I've had some hard times in our relationship, and when I feel stuck, a lot of times it's because I don't know what the next step is. I don't know where we're going together, or I feel like, it's not really clear what the next steps are. And so anytime you feel a little overwhelmed or stressed or anxious or depressed or really not sure, some of these things can be really helpful to have, like, where is it that I want to go? Because when you can get clear on that, then you can begin to identify, okay, well, this part, maybe the communication part, is where we need to start. Like, we're not on the same page with things. Let's just start talking about this aspect of our relationship, or let's just work on, like, how to communicate in general. Like, how can we learn to listen to each other and communicate in ways that the other person can hear and receive, and vice versa. It has to be a mutual thing. Both of you have to, if it's communication, that's a two-sided thing. It can't just be a one-sided thing. So creating a vision like that can really, really help when you're making these decisions, because again, you're going to go back to what I was talking about originally. If you create a vision like that and you go, there's absolutely nothing in our current relationship or in the past that shows me that we can get there, then that's something to consider. But if there's a lot in your history and a lot that's being done presently that lines up with your goals, and you say, okay, there's some healing that needs to be done, but we can get here, then that's really, really encouraging. And that can also help you make your decision. Okay, so the third question to ask yourself as you're going through this process is, once you have kind of created that vision, I want you to really, truly ask yourself, do I believe I deserve that life? Do I believe I deserve that life? The reason I throw this question in there is because if we have any sort of limiting beliefs about what we're capable of achieving or what we deserve in a relationship, then we are, unfortunately, and this is true for everyone, no matter what the limiting belief is, we will tend to live into the limiting belief, not the vision. And so that's why it's really important to be able to identify those. So if there's a part of you that goes, yeah, I think that's great. And, if my friend wrote a list like that, I would totally be like, don't settle, go for that. You deserve it. But when I apply it to myself, I don't actually think I can, I don't think I deserve that. I don't think anybody will treat me that way. Then that is a belief that we can work on. We need to process that. That might be rooted deeply somewhere in your nervous system, in your body, from something that happened in the past, maybe a past relationship, maybe something in your childhood. But that is something that we want to replace with a belief that you are worthy. We want to replace it with the truth. So when you ask that question, how does your nervous system respond? Do I believe that I deserve that kind of a relationship? So that's a good question to ask. The fourth question to ask as you're going through this process is, do I believe that we are capable of achieving that? So first of all, asking, like, do I believe that I deserve that, right? Do I believe that I deserve that? But then I want you to ask yourself, do I believe that we are capable of achieving that? Again, basing that on the past behavior and current behavior. Is this reality, is this future reality a real possibility? So if you have good information from the past, positive information from the present, and you can see that your partner is, like, on board with this vision and you're not there yet, but you're working towards it together. And if you had this conversation, laid this out, they would be all on board with this and be like, yeah, that sounds amazing. What do we do? And how can I help us get there? That's going to be really positive information. Or if you go, nothing in my past, nothing in my present aligns with this future vision, none of their behavior. And I know that if I presented this, they would, laugh it off as like a ridiculous idea. Then that's also information. Question number 5, and this one is only based on if they say yes. If you say yes to the last question, do I believe we're capable of achieving that? If you say yes, then you go on to the next question, which is, what steps can we take now to begin working towards this goal? So when you've created that ideal couple, that ideal life, that vision for your future, you've identified the areas like how they interact with friends, how they communicate together, how they talk about different things, how they support each other, respect each other, love each other, trust each other. What does that specifically look like to you? What kind of behaviors, what words are used? When you've created that vision and you have an idea that based on the past and based on the current behavior, that's a possibility and they are all in with you, then you begin to identify what are the areas that are the biggest roadblocks to us right now moving forward. Now, again, if you're early on in this process, the biggest roadblock is them getting into recovery and sobriety and you beginning to work on healing and trauma recovery and setting boundaries and those sorts of things. So part of recovery, the first 1 to 2 years, irons out a little bit of this in terms of you do learn how to communicate a little bit better. You do learn because setting boundaries is such a crucial part of the betrayed partner's healing process. And so you have to learn how to communicate that. And again, that's something I work on with my clients regularly is what are the specific boundaries for you and how can we communicate those effectively for your relationship? And so some of this gets ironed out through the process, but let's say you're beyond that, right? And you're sort of into the phase of like, okay, we are safe, we are stable, he is in recovery, I have done a lot of work, but we're still just like, we're not there, right? We're not living in the happy, enjoyable, relaxed phase of our relationship yet. And that's okay. This takes time. And I just want to validate and remind you of that again. It is a bumpy road. But that's why I'm having you go through these questions, because when you can get really clear about where you want to go, you can also get really clear about what is the biggest roadblock in your way right now. So if on that list, for example, maybe you heard things like hobbies and friends and free time and things like that, and you're like, man, like, I think that we're doing pretty good, but I've had a lot of depression. And then you're listening to that list and you're like, I do not hang out with any of my friends. And in fact, I haven't hung out or had gone out to dinner or invited anybody over or had coffee dates or anything since like before discovery. And maybe it's been a couple years. Maybe that's an aspect of just pouring back into yourself and redeveloping those relationships could bring enough energy and life back into your body that would then translate into your relationship as well. And so that's an important thing to consider, is that when we aren't creating a life that we are really satisfied with as an individual away from our partner, it's going to negatively impact the partnership itself. The healthiest relationship is one where you have two people that are happy and healthy that then choose to be together because they like each other and they complement each other in a positive way, and they help each other move towards their goals and support each other as individuals. But there is a level to which, in order for that to happen, you have to keep your individuality a little bit, right? And so you have your friends that you spend time with. You do pour into your own hobbies. You have to activate that creative part of your mind. Like, do I take a piano lesson? Do I take a dance lesson? Do we do that as a couple? Is that an activity that would help us connect as a couple? Or is that something maybe that would just help fill up my cup so that I can show up better in the relationship because I'm happier with my life and I have that creative outlet? Okay. So those are all things to consider through this process. But this is an important step, this last question of what steps can we take now to begin working towards this goal, identifying what areas are still a struggle or what areas are still a little bit lacking. And I do encourage you to definitely work with a coach, work with a practitioner, work with somebody who can kind of help you and guide you through this. Sometimes it's a journaling exercise. Sometimes it is a subconscious brain rewiring exercise that helps you get unstuck. Sometimes it is practice. It's literally practice. Like you might know what you need to do, but you need to call that friend. Right. And so it's practicing, but going through these exercises can at least help you identify that. And if you need a coach to help you, reach out. Again, the link is in my show notes if you're a betrayed partner. If you are the recovering addict, definitely check out the links in the show notes as well. We direct you to some really awesome resources there too. But we highly recommend whenever possible to work with professionals because it's just so helpful to have that high level perspective. Sometimes when we are so in our own heads, it's really hard to see in front of us, right? And so it gets difficult, especially if we are caught up in communication patterns that are negative with our partner, and behavioral patterns. It can be difficult when we've done the same thing over and over and over and over and over again to see that there's another possibility available to us. And that's why it's so helpful to identify those people that have been where you are, but are now where you want to be so that they can help guide you. So that they can say, I know how you feel. And here's another step you can try. Here's another perspective. Here's a way you might reframe that a little bit. Here's some encouragement. I'm going to validate where you are because it's normal and because what you're going through is hard. There's no getting around that. But we also want to encourage you that you don't have to stay there. There are certainly steps to take. And so this is some of these exercises hopefully will begin to help you identify exactly what the reality is currently and also help you dream a little bit about what it is that you want and connecting those two. Is that a reality? Is that a possibility? And you can start thinking through those things. So based on all of that information, going back to like this original idea, this question, I feel stuck. How can I make a decision about our relationship? I hope that some of these questions have helped you think through that a little bit and given you a little bit of perspective on where you are. And again, we really want to make decisions about our future that are based in the reality of today. And so there is a time and place to really think through the past, really analyze the present and what is happening and what is reality now. And that helps us make a really reasonable, healthy choice for our future. And sometimes we sit in the present for a little while to analyze, to absorb the information, to see if time plays this thing out. And so if that's where you are right now, that's okay. There's no rush. If you feel like you've been watching for a long time, then hopefully these questions have guided you a little bit to figure out and analyze a little bit more completely what might be the better choice for you as you move forward one direction or another. I really want to emphasize too, I mentioned communication throughout this. That is like one of the biggest pillars of being able to reconcile is learning how to communicate effectively, often, and like nonstop about everything. I mean, what are your hopes? What are your dreams? What are your fears? What are your insecurities? What are your triggers? Where are you in the recovery process? And there's no right or wrong. You could be 6 years into this and have a trauma trigger come up. And I don't want you to feel ashamed about that. I want you to be able to safely communicate that to your partner. And it's also okay to be doing all of this work and to feel great for like 6 months and then have a really, really hard week or a really, really hard month. That's normal. It's part of this process and it's okay. But I really want to normalize when you and your partner have done a lot of work, it's still okay. And let's say you are so far ahead of where you thought you would be and you're amazed at where you are. You guys have like just accomplished so much and it's so great to be proud of yourself. And maybe you're still sad. And so I want to normalize the idea that it's okay to say, I'm proud of how far we've come, but I'm not happy with where we are. That is okay. And in fact, I actually think that some of the biggest breakthroughs that Patrick and I have had are when like I've been really honest about saying, hey, I'm struggling and I'm really not okay with where we are right now. I know that we've worked so hard, but in this particular area, like, again, kind of going back to what I mentioned earlier, like if we were here in 5 years and nothing changed in this area of our relationship, I'm not going to be okay with it. And so we have to be really honest about analyzing our relationship continually. And I don't actually think this is a one-time thing where you feel like, okay, well, we've dealt with the trauma of betrayal. the addiction is in recovery. We feel really strong about that. So analyzing our relationship and improving our relationship, like we're done with that, right? Like, I don't think that ever goes away. I think in order to have a healthy relationship that lasts forever and you stay happy in and you stay engaged in and you stay committed to on all levels forever together, then I think it's a constant process of analyzing, communicating, reevaluating, growing, changing, shifting, supporting each other, and moving towards that next goal. But we have to be able to identify it first, and then we have to be able to communicate it and then support each other through it. I hope that this has been helpful. I hope some of the questions have maybe helped you think through some things this week. Please reach out if you need any support and click the link down in the show notes if you're interested in working together as a betrayed partner. But I hope that this has been helpful, and I can't wait to see you next week. Woohoo! If you're listening to this, it means you've made it through an entire episode. Part of recovery is spending time engaging in healing and self-growth activities. We are thankful that you chose our podcast to be one of those activities today. Make sure you reward yourself for that accomplishment. If you've enjoyed this episode or this podcast, we would love to hear from you. Please take just a few moments to leave a rating and review, letting us know your experience with Recover You. We not only love hearing how these episodes are helpful, but ratings and reviews help others just like you who are searching for recovery information and support find the podcast too. We can't wait to hear from you. See you next week.